Hello and welcome to another episode of The Exchange.
On today's show, we'll be discussing whether entitlement pervades our culture. Australians are considered one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but we also have been accused of living in an age of entitlement.
We'll take a look at what entitlement is, its impact on society at large, and whether we have a right to be entitled.
I'm entitled to a good job, a nice car, a big house. We all have our own opinions on what we deserve, whether it's because we've worked hard for something or simply because everyone else has one. But what do we actually deserve? What should we rightfully expect and what shouldn't we?
To discuss this topic, we're joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Simon Kinsella. Simon is also the past chairman of the Victorian State Committee of the Australian Psychological Society. It's great to have you here today, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Dr. Andrew Fuller, who is a clinical psychologist and works with many schools and communities in Australia and internationally. Andrew specialises in the well-being of young people and their families. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, great to be here.
So to start this, we're talking about entitlement. What do we mean when we talk about entitlement? Let's start with you, Simon.
Well, it's really this sense that everything should go the way that we want it to go, regardless of other factors that might come into play, like other people's needs or other people's roles.
Would you add anything to that, Andrew, or is that pretty well it?
Well, lots of the young people I work with, I guess, think about success as really being famous and being rich as anything, really. So money, money, money. And they're entitled to it as quickly as possible. And, that's a reasonable thing to aspire to, of course, but the reality of life is not always
Quite different. So there's
neat.
no longer the idea that you start at the bottom, you work your way up, the corner office is not yours the minute you walk out of college?
Of course it is. Absolutely. Exactly. That's what you expect, isn't it?
Well, we're seeing even the politicians are buying into this idea that we're living in an age of entitlement. Andrew, would you agree with that?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. I think we can kind of confuse immediate gratification with entitlement. Now, certainly we live in a world where we expect immediate gratification. And that's probably true of adults as well as kids, I think. But we're also living in a world which has a mixed picture. So I work basically running a not-for-profit group called Resilient Youth Australia, and we've surveyed over 17,000 young Australians. And what we find is that the kids that are really resilient have very high levels of social awareness, social activity, volunteering, and so their willingness to be involved in improving society is really quite stunning. So there's a sort of mixed picture that goes on. In the employment area, we certainly see this expectation, as you say, of wanting to, aspire to being right at the top from day one. But in terms of social awareness, we actually see a group of young people who are willing, but not called upon, I'll come back to that later if you like, basically to really help out.
Okay. Do you think it's on the rise, entitlement on the rise, Simon?
Well, I think there's been some big shifts in the way that people think about what they should have, and I started to notice this in clinical practice when university fees started to come in and students started to have the expectation that because they were paying for this, they were regarding it as a service, and because it's a service they have a right to expect a certain amount of interaction with their educators, and that then translated, I think, to an expectation that you've got this degree that you've worked hard to get and that you should be then elevated when you enter the workforce.
Right.
I also noticed a dramatic change around 2008 when the GFC started to hit, where suddenly students were hit with the reality that they weren't going to get a job so easily, and a lot of young people's expectations, young adults' expectations started to change. They started to recognise that it wasn't their God-given right and that there wasn't going to be an easy path, and that they were seeing senior people being retrenched from their jobs and realising that they were competing in the same market for people with 10 years or 15 or 20 years of experience.
So everything started to change?
I think so,
Yeah.
Yes. Particularly for the age group from about 19, 20 upwards. There's still, I think, a tension between people entering the workforce who have those expectations going into the workforce, and once they've been in the workforce for a few years, starting to recognise that they're not going to get the corner office and they're not going to get the best contracts, and that they are actually out of their depth when they start work.
It's funny, isn't it? You get people that they're just, like you say, we've experienced this, they get out of uni or whatever, and it's like, well, here I am, you've been waiting for me, and your wait is no longer.
And I think part of the problem is as well that they've been fed all their life, you're a winner, you're going to be the CEO, you're going to be the GM, and they're not. And then we end up with a disappointed generation.
Yes, it's interesting. I think that we're actually seeing in the last few months a shift among the young people in the sense of them moving away from university as being a pathway towards that. So the idea that there's ever going to be enough jobs is something that's fading. And so a lot of people are saying, well, really, why should I pay all those fees at university to get a qualification which will qualify me to do nothing? It won't get me into the corner office, but it won't really get me anywhere in the building at all. And so maybe I should just forego all of that and think about social entrepreneurialism, starting up businesses, that type of... So I think the workforce is changing quite rapidly at the moment.
What would you say some of the negative impacts of entitlement are? And we'll look at maybe some of the positives. Simon?
I think we see a lot of people getting very frustrated and disappointed quite early in their careers. I think there can be a real phase of adjustment as young people enter adulthood and recognise that they're not going to get the things that they wanted as easily as they wanted.
Yep.
And that they have to go from what they thought was working hard at university or working hard through school to actually entering the workforce and seeing what it's like to work a 5-day,
really working
40
hard.
or 50-hour week with 4 weeks holiday. So I see people with mood disorders and anxiety disorders as they start to adjust to the fact that this is the reality. This is what most people have to deal with as they enter the adult world.
So that's what entitlement does then? Does it create kind of this false bubble?
Yeah, false expectations about where they should be in life and what they should expect from life. And really, if you look at the people who do well, it's a very small proportion that accelerate rapidly in their 20s. Most people work progressively towards greater career success over 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, which gets back to what you were talking about before. You know, we expect everything
straight away, and
right
then there's
front.
huge disappointment. And as you say, the adjustments are not there. People are not making the adjustments as they need to.
Where does entitlement start, Andrew? Does it start in the home? Does it start with parenting? Where does it all begin?
Well, I guess the idea of the pampered child is something that's an interesting kind of idea. And one of the negatives of it is we often think about entitlement in relation to work, but probably it's in relationships that it shows up most powerfully as a problem. And so what I often see are people who believe that they're entitled to a better relationship than the one they currently have. And so there's almost a sort of myth of expendability of people. And what that means, of course, is that I'm always holding out for a better offer.
Right.
And what that means is that what I see are lots of people, and not just young people, who are basically good at starting relationships. They're just not good at repairing them when they get a bit frayed, because they feel entitled to basically something better. And so there's a sort of idea that, oh, well, if this doesn't work, I'll move on. And that's true of friendship, but it's also true of romance. And so that becomes a problem, I think. So what we have really as a society, a real need to think about how do we help people to learn how to repair relationships and how to be responsible for the entire relationship, not just as they would see it, their part of it, because that's damaging.
So not just seeing, say, like a marriage relationship as a 10-year lease with the option to extend, like actually trying to make this work.
Yeah.
Understanding, of course, that it can't always work.
Well, I suppose the parallel I often use is lots of people see their relationships like it's a tennis court, and whatever's wrong with the relationships on your side of the net. And so if you fix your game, all will be fine. Yeah. And that's not how life works, of course. You take responsibility for the entire relationship if you can.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about resilience. There's so much focus on building self-esteem into children. Andrew, would you say there's been more focus on building self-esteem in than building resilience into children, like how to deal with the knocks?
Look, I think what we're starting to see a shift towards in the way that we're educating children is that self-esteem isn't about thinking that you're fantastic. Self-esteem is about recognising your strengths and weaknesses. We're starting to see a bit more focus on not you've done a good job, aren't you a clever person, to how did you get that good result? So getting people to think about the process of success rather than just seeing it as a fixed outcome. So I think traditionally there has been a focus on making people feel like they're good regardless of their faults. And I think one of the consequences of that is that people start to doubt the information that they're given. So if a parent tells them you're a wonderful person, and they know that there's something not quite right in themselves, that maybe they've done something wrong, or they're not being as successful as they should, they then start to think, well, maybe my parents aren't telling me the truth. Maybe they're just telling me a story because they have to love me, they have to think I'm good. And so they in a way cut off one avenue of feedback by building up a wall against feedback that they don't fully trust. And then they start to look at the feedback that tells them that they're not so good, and they start to believe that more because they've got the internal evidence for that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Very interesting,
We'll come back and explore a little bit more on that in just a moment. We need to take a break. Back with more and Street Talk right after this.
Do you think we're spoilt as a society?
In Australia, I would say definitely we're spoiled. I think that because we live in a society where we've got all these wonderful shops and laneways around us, we learn to take all those sorts of things for granted. So if you think about how things are in lots of other different countries, we're definitely spoilt for choice here, yeah.
I don't think so, no.
No, I don't think we are, no.
And what makes you say that?
We have to work.
We have resources, knowledge and people who we can tap into without any dramas whatsoever, and I don't think we appreciate that as much as we should.
I think so.
How so?
Well, we've got a lot of things happening around technology's taken over, so there's a lot of things that's going on at the moment. We got it easy. The old days, it was basically very hard to do things.
I think compared to other countries, we are considering the poverty in other countries.
Absolutely. We have it too good. To use the Treasurer's phrase, the sense of entitlement is just far too strong. We need to do more for ourselves.
In comparison with the third world, we'd have to say we're spoilt in this society.
In what ways?
In the sense of material advantage, clean air, clean water, the ability to find a job. A lot of those things just aren't available to many countries in the world.
And do you think society owes you anything?
No, not at all. If anything, I owe society because, if I want to live a long and healthy life, the more I contribute to my society, the better off I'm going to be. So, yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Definitely not. No, I wouldn't have a reason to say that it owes me anything at all.
Well, not really. I don't think so. I think life is what you make of it yourself. So at the end of the day, it's what you do to make it happen for yourself.
Not me personally, but I think the government needs to be doing more to help homeless people on the street and funding them. And I think there is things that the government could be doing to help society. Yeah.
Do you think society owes you anything?
Certainly not in my lifetime. I think society has treated me very well.
I think everybody should have the opportunity to get a job and to live a reasonably good life. But I don't think anybody owes me that.
Not at all. I think we need to protect those who are not capable of looking after themselves, but for the rest of us, we need to roll the sleeves up.
Welcome back. We're discussing, does entitlement pervade our culture? With Dr. Simon Kinsella and Andrew Fuller. And Sandra, our Street Talk reporter, joins us. Some wonderful feedback there.
Great feedback.
Very interesting. How funny was the guy who said, "Oh, I'll have to work"?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, fancy that.
Yes, fancy having to work. I felt he was quite interesting. He was probably the only one that I came across that didn't have an appreciation of how much he has. Most people on the street said, oh, compared to other countries, we're totally spoilt, which I thought was really healthy.
Because we are spoilt compared to other countries, do you think that actually increases our sense of entitlement?
I think that we often overlook basically all of the great things about this country, and so it's very easy to kind of feel ourselves a bit hard done by, and we do talk down the possibilities for Australian people, I think. I mean, we're in a very fortunate position relative to the rest of the world, and we really want to think about how we leverage that to kind of have people then feel empowered to make a difference in the world, I think.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting, it was someone said, oh, the government needs to do more. Well, how about starting with yourself? What can you do more? Do you see people thinking that way when you in practice?
I certainly see more people shifting towards it, and I think what the street talk really showed was that there's a tendency for the older adults to actually really recognise what they've gained throughout their lives from society. And I think to some extent that's a life lesson, that as you get older and you have more interaction, you understand better how society works and how our society works, then you recognise that there's quid pro quo you've got to put in to get out.
Yeah, I think we saw there the lady who said, ask, it was sort of like more like the JF Kennedy thing,
yeah.
Ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, rather ask what you can do for your country. And you were talking a little bit about that, Andrew, to me earlier, about providing contributions to society, which actually helps you as well.
Yes, I think one of the things that governments of any colour could basically do would be to think about how we help school students to have an experience in making a contribution. And I mean, Australia has some foreseeable, perils on its board. I mean, some issues to deal with. Water distribution's one, potential pandemics is another. Border security is obviously an issue, population distribution. And so these are the sorts of problems that not necessarily would expect students to solve, but at least having a go. If we want young Australians to be contributors and if we want them to be problem solvers, we need to give them problems to solve.
Yes.
And I think we don't do that anywhere near enough. We have this very capable group of young people. They're really bright. In fact, they're much cleverer than previous generations, and we don't call upon them to contribute very much at all. We don't take their opinions around these issues at all seriously enough.
So organisations like YGAP, do you think that's quite exciting, because that's all about mobilising youth and young adults, to make a contribution?
Yes, so we need more of that, we need it more pervasively, but we want to just, rather than having it necessarily being small welfare issues, I think it's important for young people to feel that they have contribution to some of the bigger national issues, really, that are things that are longer term planning, because indeed it's their future that they're talking about, so it makes sense for them to kind of contribute to solutions for that.
I wonder if it's hard for people, though, that if they haven't travelled and they've actually seen firsthand. I mean, it's one thing to see pictures of starving kids or whatever on TV, but actually being there. I wonder how we can actually give some of our young people a first-hand experience, even within Australia, amongst our Indigenous communities.
Well, I don't think you have to leave the CBD to see poverty.
Exactly.
There's plenty of people sleeping on the streets and begging, and there are many people who not even living on the streets, but in supported housing, who just can't get their lives working the way we would want them to. So it's, I guess, educating people that it's all around us. It's not beyond our borders at all.
Yeah.
Working, Andrew, with Simon, with businesses and coaching, are you finding that there's more awareness that actual businesses and staff inside a business want to contribute to society as a team? It's a team effort, a group effort?
Well, I think that depends a lot on the culture of the organisation. Some organisations are really good at supporting volunteerism, and some of the larger organisations actually pay people their day's wage to go off and do a day of charity, and for some of those organisations it might be up to 5 or 6 days in a year. So it's quite a significant contribution from those companies if you look across their entire staff body, where other organisations are so much more focused on the bottom line and bringing the money in. And I do see plenty of people in across the spectrum of organisations who would like to be able to contribute more, but they're also then caught up in their own issues of needing to bring the money in, needing to pay the mortgages. Mortgage stress is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for a lot of people, looking after their children and balancing life when you've got two parents working as well, is becoming, these are all factors that are contributing to people just focusing in on their own issues more. And even though people are caught in that sort of focus, they're still aware that there's other things they'd like to be doing if they had the time.
That's an interesting point that you've just raised there, though, because we need to be able to look after what concerns us. I guess what you're saying, though, is the challenge is that for a lot of people it stops there. Whereas what I'm hearing from both of you is that we need to have some expression in our life that goes beyond our borders to particularly help other people.
And there's no question that being involved with other people and volunteerism actually helps people develop in themselves and helps them frame, I suppose, a sense of positivity about what they can contribute
sense of
to the world.
community as well.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Neighbourliness.
One last comment from you, Andrew?
We used to have this wonderful thing called the Commonwealth of Australia.
Oh, yes.
Commonwealth. And I think we've forgotten it. And I think it's something we need to really reactivate, the idea that there is a Commonwealth and that people contribute to that Commonwealth and it actually affects the well-being of all of us. And I think it's important that all Australians have some part of that, whether it be through universal health care or whether it be through at least a security system that basically for the unemployed or less fortunate there's at least a basic financial security that they can survive on, that really allows us to have a civil society.
Brilliant. Sandra, thank
Great.
you for
Thanks,
popping
Sandra.
in.
Great to be here.
Wonderful. We'll be back with more in just a moment on The Exchange. Welcome back. We're chatting with Dr. Simon Kinsella and Andrew Fuller.
Yeah, we've just been chatting a little bit about the whole area of entitlement. Is there actually a place where we can be entitled to anything, Andrew?
Definitely. I think that we're entitled to respect. I think we're entitled to feel good about our life and basically to have some civility in terms of those relationships. We're also entitled to feel that we can make a contribution to the country that we live in. So the idea of a meaningful life, I think meaning is one of the most powerfully protective things in our lives. And so the idea that you as a member of our country can contribute to the well-being of it and as a collective is a very important idea. It's important for young people, but it's important for our elderly as well. It's important for everyone, really. And so the idea that you're respected and that you are a valuable contributor to our country is an important thing.
So the things that you mentioned are sort of bigger ideals than your Centrelink payments or monetary contributions. I mean, when people talk about entitlement, are they thinking mainly about those things, do you think?
I think that people often do want to make a contribution. I think people want to be part of a place that they feel they can sort of help out. People are very proud of Australia, I think, as a country. We're a pretty proud bunch and we're pretty hopeful as well. And so we just don't call upon it anywhere near enough.
So we should be focusing on how we can help people contribute to community.
So we've talked about contribution or volunteering as one of the antidotes to false entitlement, if we can put it that way. What other things would you say, Simon? How can we overcome false entitlement and really make a positive difference?
I think it's helping people recognise what is actually important, and we've talked about respect, and I think that's a key ingredient and part of the whole issue of respect is respecting what's gone before you. And as we see people entering the workforce, for instance, or people interacting with others, they don't necessarily understand what's gone before them and how people have had to approach things or work to get to where they are. And that might be in the workplace, it might be about their relationships with other people, it might be just in, I suppose, figuring out how to structure your life in a way that's going to be successful, whatever that level of success might be for you.
Right, sure. So appreciating what's gone before, looking beyond yourself, volunteering, all of those sort of things.
And taking time on the journey. I think the tyranny of the now, people want everything and they want it now. So actually being prepared to wait.
Yeah, and work toward. Simon and Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on The Exchange today.
Great pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Please go to our website for a fact sheet as well as more information about our show. Hope you can join us next time.
Look forward to seeing you.